So in this video, we're going to practice factoring trinomials that may have a GCF that needs factored out first, okay? So let's go ahead and start with example 1. Now, you're either watching this video because you were absent from class, and in that case, I need you to grab a piece of paper or your spiral notebook, okay, and copy these examples down, or maybe you were in class, but you're having trouble with the homework, so you just need to rewatch a few of the examples, okay? So let's start with something like this. So the first question I want you to ask yourself before you start any problem is there a GCF? Okay, and when I look at this, I look at it and I can see that these two have a common factor of 2, but the first term doesn't. So no, that's not going to work. And I see that maybe these two have a common factor of x, but not the third. And so basically, there is no GCF in this problem, which is fine, okay, because then we're going to move over to step 2, which is going to be to factor the trinomial. All right, so let's practice factoring trinomials that look a little bit more complicated and have more variables. When we factor trinomial, we start by taking the first term and we split it right here into factors that are x times x, okay? Then we come over here and we look at the last term. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the last term, 8y squared, and factor it into factors of 8. Now, things that multiply to make 8 are 1 and 8 and 4 and 2. Which of these two factors are going to multiply to make 8, but add or subtract to make 2xy? And so we're going to use 4 and 2. Now, because of the y squared, we're going to split it into 4y and 2y. Now, that brings us to this middle term. This 2xy is the outer and the inner combined like terms. So the outer term is 2xy, the inner term is 4xy. And so then the question becomes, how does the outer and the inner add or subtract to make a positive 2xy? So I particularly like this rule a lot, where if I can see that this middle sign right here is a positive, I know that the bigger of the two terms needs to reflect that middle sign. So whatever the bigger term is in your outer and your inner, it needs to have the same sign as the middle term of the trinomial. So if we have a positive 4xy, take away 2xy, that's going to make it add to make 2xy, but multiply to make negative 8y squared. So let's put our signs in. It's going to be plus, minus. So the final answer, the factors are x plus 4y and x minus 2y. So again, we've had practice with multiplying these parentheses and expanding them out. But now what we're doing is practicing going backwards and taking these algebraic expressions and breaking it into parts. All right? So let's look at the next one. This is kind of an interesting problem that you're going to see come up a couple times. Negative x squared plus 13x minus 40. So the question kind of always becomes, is there a greatest common factor? Well, in this case, I think it's a little bit easier to see that there's not a common factor. However, what's grabbing my attention right here is this negative that comes first. Before you factor a trinomial, I want that leading coefficient to be positive. And so what we do is in math, we can factor out a negative 1. So by factoring out the negative 1, all that's going to happen is when we divide all three of these terms by negative 1, they're going to turn into the opposite. So this negative x squared is going to turn into a positive x squared, which is what we want before we try to factor that trinomial. We want the first term to be positive. The positive 13x is going to become minus 13x, and negative 40 divided by negative 1 is going to become plus 40. So if we look at this, by factoring out that negative 1, the leading coefficient is positive and everything else became the opposite. So now what we can do is we can factor the trinomial. All right, that negative 1 is going to stay out front. You can either leave it as a negative 1 or you could even just put a negative. And we're going to split that trinomial. Again, we start by taking the x squared and we split it. And then we're going to split the last term, 40. Now again, what multiplies to make 40? Well, obviously 40 and 1. We could do 2 and 20, 4 and 10. And then we also could make it 8 and 5. So which of these factors multiply to make 40, but add and subtract to make 13? And we're going to use the 8 and the 5. All right, now I feel pretty confident that we have the right numbers. And now the last part of this is we need to figure out how the outer and the inner are going to make the 13x. So we have the outer is 5x, the inner is 8x. And again, we kind of talked about this, that if the middle sign right here is a negative, then I already know that the bigger of the two terms needs to reflect that middle sign. So if it's negative 8 minus 5, it will multiply to make, it'll add to make negative 13, but multiply to make positive 40. So it's going to go minus, minus. All right, here's your final answer, okay? The final factors is going to be negative x minus 8, x minus 5. If you want to make that into a negative 1 out front, you can, but just having a negative means the same thing. All right, let's look at our next one. So the next one we're going to do is going to look like this. Example 3. 2a cubed minus 4a squared b minus 6ab squared. And these are where they start looking a little bit more intimidating, and that is why we have to start first with factor out a GCF, okay? Factor out the GCF, which is what? What is the GCF? Well, I look at the coefficients and they're all divisible by 2. Since I don't have a negative out in front as the leading coefficient, I don't need to worry about that whole factoring out of a negative this time. So I know I can divide a 2 out from all the coefficients. Now, what variable do all 3 terms have? And all 3 terms have an a. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor out a 2a. The result is going to be this, remember, and we can even kind of make a picture if we need to. This is 2 times a times a times a. 4 can break down into 2 times 2 times a times a times b. And 6 can break down into 3 times 2 times a times b times b. So we can do this with a picture, or we can just do it by dividing out a 2a. So if I kind of think about circling what they have in common, they all have a 2 in common, and they all have 1a in common. So what I'm left with here, if I factor out a 2a, is going to be an a squared. If we factor out 4 divided by 2, we're going to be left with minus 2 with 1a and 1b left over. And 6 divided by 2 is going to be minus 3, and there's 2 b's left over. Okay? So there's that GCF step. 2, we need to factor the trinomial. All right. So what we're going to do is we are going to then leave the GCF out front, and we're going to take this trinomial and we're going to split it into the 2 parentheses. I start by taking the first term and I split it into a and a. And then I move over here and I look at the last term, which is 3b squared. Well, I don't have a lot of choices for 3, so we know it's got to be 3b and b. All right, since 3 is prime, only 1 and 3 are going to multiply. And this is where we figure out, okay, this is the puzzle part again. How does the outer and the inner make a negative 2ab? Well, the outer is, sorry about that, the outer is 1ab and the inner is 3ab. And so again, if this is a minus, then the bigger term has to be the minus. So if it is a negative 3ab plus 1ab, we can make a negative 2ab in the middle. All right, so the final factors are going to be 2a followed by a minus 3b times a plus b. And when we multiply all that together, you get the original problem back. Okay, so the last one I want to do is going to be, let's make those exponents a little bit higher this time. Let's make this x to the 4th plus 7x squared y plus 10y squared. First question, is there a greatest common factor? Okay, well, there's no coefficient that's going to divide into all the terms, and they don't all have an x or all have a y. So let's go ahead and go straight to factoring our trinomial. We're going to start by taking the first term and breaking it into x squared and x squared. All right, and then we're going to come over here to the last term, and we're going to factor 10y squared. Now again, with 10, it could either be 10 and 1 or 5 and 2, and I feel pretty confident that 5 and 2 is going to make 7. Because of the y squared, we're going to split this into 5y and 2y. Finally, I look in the middle, and now I figure out how the outer and the inner make 7x squared y. So this is 2x squared y, 5x squared y, and I think the signs are pretty easy to see. If we have a plus in the middle, then that means the bigger one needs to be a plus. Do I want to take 5x squared y plus 2x squared y or 5x squared y minus 2x squared y? To make a positive 7, we're going to add. So the signs are going to go plus, plus. And I hope what you're seeing here is that once you kind of get the idea of how to factor these trinomials through guessing and checking the outer and the inner, it really doesn't make them that much harder to have bigger exponents, more variables. It's the same steps. So I hope this video helped you be able to complete your homework and understand the concept better. Thanks for watching.